LaPietra works at Queen's University at the Greenspon Center, and she's spoken to our club before on the Holocaust last year during Peace and Conflict Resolution Month. I'm not going to go through her bio again, it's in the newsletter. I am just so happy that she's going to be talking to us today about something that she's working on as part of her dissertation, and that's on what reconciliation looks like in Rwanda. And without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Judy LaPietra. Thank you for being here.
I have to walk and talk. So, is this camera, are we good to do live?
Yes, you're good.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me back. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I thank Kevin for extending the invitation to share my research that is based in Rwanda. It is ongoing, so I'm in the middle of my dissertation in my spare time, right? But it's really important work for me. And so I would love to just share some of the things that I'm engaged in and some, I think, important takeaways for our time. So I know we only have about 25 minutes with Q&A. So
I don't mind being your dad.
So obviously, you know, a very complicated history to cover in a very short time. But I do want to give you a little background. So where in the world is Rwanda? So it's a very small country in the center of the African continent. The capital city is Kigali. And this country experienced a horrific genocide that lasted about 100 days in April of 1994. And at the end of it, over 1 million people perished, right? So, you know, last time I was here, we talked about, I think, the term genocide. I don't want to kind of get into the details of that. There are very strict elements that need to be in place for a crime to be deemed a genocide. And this absolutely fits the definition. So how is this genocide carried out? Who is it directed toward? It was highly organized, as are all genocides. It was directed, let's say this, I might need a Vanna. I am so sorry. Technology.
I gotta hit the space bar, right?
Just hit the space bar, yep. Okay. So very meticulously organized, list of government opponents were handed out to militants for targeting, right, for execution of a certain group of people known as the Tutsi in Rwanda. Neighbors killed neighbors. In some instances, we have spouses killing spouses. You know, the question is why? Where did this originate? How does the hate begin? Okay, so there's an important backstory here, obviously an important history that has to do with the concept of race. And so I don't know if you remember in our last discussion, we talked about this social construct that came to be in the mid-1800s. This idea that certain people were superior to others based on perceived scientific differences, right? The pseudoscience of race emerges, and it takes hold at a time, especially in Europe, where Europe is going out and trying to colonize the world. In order to justify this colonization, they come to places like Africa and Asia, and they encounter people that look differently than Europeans, right? So the pseudoscience of race emerges. This idea of, oh, you're inferior because your skin is darker, your nose is bigger, your hair is different, and so on. It's an absurdity that we are living with today. And by the way, concept of race, right? We talk about this with our students. This was well entrenched in our own society. I start with a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that talks about the inferior races that need to be eliminated. This is a direct quote from Teddy Roosevelt, right? So, so that is an important backstory to understand this. Why? Because first Germany is going to colonize the area that will be Rwanda. Then after World War I, it will be the country of Belgium. And they take with this these concepts of race. So we have ID cards, identification cards that people are required to carry. You are either identified in Rwanda as a Tutsi or a Hutu. These are not two separate ethnic groups, but one ethnic group with a common history. What is the difference? And if we could move on, okay? And so we will get to, what the brutality looks like, certainly in the case of Rwanda. And I put this point here because the Rwandan genocide actually marks a new beginning with regard to the use of rape in warfare and genocide. Prior to Rwanda, the International Criminal Court did not recognize rape as a weapon of war. After Rwanda, it is. Okay, so that's an important context, and we can move on. All right, so how does the genocide start? About 85% of Rwandans are Hutu, and the Tutsi were in the minority. The Tutsi, however, had always dominated Rwandan society, and it has to do with economic differences, right? They were typically landowners. They were typically, they owned more cattle than the Hutu. So there was this historic economic disparity. It's not a racial difference here. Okay, and we can move on. So we have a group of Tutsis are exiled. They leave. This is the lead up to the genocide. They form a group known as the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And this Patriotic Front is going to be a big player in the genocide. But there is interfighting between these groups that is kind of leading up, that is the precursor to what happens in '94. And here's the spark that ignites the genocide. On the night of April 6, 1994, a plane carrying the president and his counterpart, who were both Hutu, was shot down and killed. To this day, we don't know who shot this plane down, but this is going to be the spark that is really going to set this genocide on fire. Okay, so obviously the Hutus blamed the RPF, maybe they did it, and immediately things went into motion to segregate people and to set up a society that essentially was perfectly suited for genocide. And when I say set up, literally roadblocks were immediately put in place so people could not leave. Okay. Okay. So this is some background. I know, I want to get to other stuff, and I know we're limited on time, and I could certainly leave this with you and share the presentation. So ID cards were administered, hit lists were disseminated. The weapon of choice in this particular genocide was the machete, right? There were no guns. This was not as sophisticated as something like the final solution to the Jewish problem in Europe. It was the machete. There was effective propaganda in Rwanda at the time, and that really was in the form of a radio. People listened to the radio. It was used as a propaganda machine. Here I included this. This is actually a photo of a Catholic church called Nyarubuye Roman Catholic Church. It's on the outskirts, about an hour outside of Kigali. And the Hutu mayor of the town told his Tutsi people, go to the church, you'll be protected, you'll be safe. And of course, he told, everybody that these people were in this church, they were sitting ducks, and they were all slaughtered in the church. To this day, this is what this church looks like in Rwanda. So priests, nuns were all complicit in this. Rwanda was a largely Catholic country, right, because of the European influence. And the estimate after 100 days was about 1 million people who perished.
Is that bones?
Yes. Yes. Okay, did anybody try to stop it? The United Nations had a force present in Rwanda, as did Belgium. There was no official mandate to intervene. The United States completely pulled out of Rwanda, including our government officials. We closed the embassy. We had no part in what was happening here for different reasons, right? We had a bad experience in Somalia. I would argue there was no real benefit for the United States to send troops in at the time, so we didn't really support the Tutsis. The French were allied with the Hutu. So when we talk about did anybody try to stop it, there was no international organization that looked at what was happening, and they knew ahead of time. We knew that this was potentially going to happen, but nobody intervened.
When you say they, who's they? With Rwanda or?
I'm sorry, who they?
When you said they knew that ahead of time, who is that?
So the international community
Okay,
was watching what was taking place.
okay.
So the writing was on the wall that things were becoming more dangerous. Okay. So it ultimately ends at the end, as I said, the estimate is close to 1 million people died. The RPF is going to eventually take over. The president of Rwanda today is a former Tutsi. There were Hutu that were exiled, who were sent out to Burundi, who to this day are living in refugee camps outside of Rwanda and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Okay, so let's talk about justice. What happens after a 90-day genocide where you have neighbor post against neighbor, right? How do you begin to reconstruct a society? So the International Criminal Court was set up in 2002, which was after the fact, after the Rwandan genocide. We had the UN Security Council, which was in existence since post-World War II. But how do we begin, retribution for something that really, it was an existential problem for Rwanda? 93 people, right? 93 people were indicted after trials, which amounted to nothing. So Rwanda had a problem. It looked to the international community. The way that the international community kind of legally deals with genocidaires, right? Criminals who commit genocide, did not fit with Rwanda. So what they did was something really interesting. They took it upon themselves to implement their own court system. And we could, I think I have a, and these courts were called Gacaca courts, right? These go back centuries, and essentially what this is a village coming together and hearing and questioning perpetrators and working through this problem, right? And this is a photo of Gacaca court. Over 12,000 times this happened in post-genocide Rwanda. The goal was to achieve truth, justice, and reconciliation, not to factually go through the genocide. People lived the genocide, they knew the facts of the genocide. The issue was, what do we do now? And we have people who participated in the genocide, ultimately confessing, talking about why they participated and why it's important for them to move forward as a society. It's remarkable, homegrown response to justice with regard to this country. Today, President Kagame, again, he has been in power. He is a controversial figure in that, there are scholars who say, well, he doesn't tolerate any kind of opposition. He eliminated the terms Hutu and Tutsi. You cannot address anybody by that name. There was a memorial to the genocide today. But if we step back, we kind of have to look at the overall, I'll get to your question in a second, the overall progress that the society has made. Okay, and yeah, this is Kagame here, right? So we have formal education, for example, on reconciliation. That is it is embedded in society today. There is an office of the government that deals solely with reconciliation and the aftermath of this genocide. And we could move on here. Okay, so this is where my work comes in. One of the parts of the justice and reconciliation process, first, the Gacaca courts. This happened all around Rwanda, right? How do we begin to process perpetrators of the genocide? The prisons are full. There has to be a better way. They look to this homegrown Gacaca solution. The second, oopsie, you're good.
Go back.
Yeah, I don't know if I could go back here. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. The reconciliation part was the challenge. How do you reconcile somebody with somebody who has killed your family? What does that reconciliation look like? And the government has responded in different ways. One such way was to set up reconciliation villages, and there are 8 of them in the country of Rwanda. And this was fascinating to me, right? The concept of post-genocidal reconciliation. I've studied genocide my whole life. I get how it happens. I get how it's carried out, but I had never studied the possibility of forgiveness, right? This is something unique to Rwanda. So I spent some time in Rwanda in my research, and I had the honor of visiting several of the reconciliation villages. And we could. So I want to share with you, this is a picture of Maria. And Maria was married when the genocide began. She is a Tutsi, or was a Tutsi. She had 3 children. She had a small baby girl and 2 young boys and a husband. And when the genocide began, her husband was targeted. He was outside of his house in this village. He was targeted, he was beaten. He came back home. She hid with her small infant, but a mob with machetes came to her house, and they took her husband and her 2 sons. And they took them away, and they slaughtered them, and they buried them in a mass grave. Maria was able to escape with her child. So just that alone is an incredible story, right? So this is her story. This is Maria and Filbert. Filbert is the person who killed Maria's family. He was responsible for using a machete against those boys and burying them, right, with the mob that he was with. He was very caught up in this. So this is a picture of, it's an example of many, right, of 2 people who are now living in a reconciliation village. They've undergone a process of unity. It was an ongoing thing, right? There are certain requirements. So he was in a prison, right? He agreed to go through this process where today they are, actually they have forged an incredible relationship. I will tell you, when I visited, and we could go through, this is me in her village, we could go back. I was skeptical. I will be honest, I was skeptical. I went to Rueru and I said, with the idea of, prove this to me. This is a little too hard for me to believe, right? And I knew in the back of my mind that there were scholars that are saying, they're pretending peace. This doesn't really happen, right? So I go to Rueru and I interview people like Maria and Filbert and others, and I come to realize that this is the real deal, right? 20 plus years when I was there after the genocide, these people actually have connections, right? Filbert, was at Maria's daughter's wedding, right? They are integrated in society. He works on her little crop, right? They are united in a sense, which blows my mind. To the extent that I kind of switched my dissertation focus to really dig deep here and try to understand how this can be. How do you forgive? How do you get to a place where, we can live in peace? Maria talks about she couldn't move forward until she did this. So it wasn't only the Filbert, the genocidaire, who carried this weight, it was both of them. And they both kind of moved forward together today. It is really remarkable. So just to give you a sense of, and I know we're running out of time, yeah, you could go through all of this. So my work is kind of framing this, putting this incredible social experiment into the framework of genocide studies. When we talk about genocides, right, there is a system of things that happen in every genocide. Gregory Stanton comes up with this working system. First, we have classification, right? Identifying who is the other. Is it the Tutsi, right? Is it the Jews in German society? Who is the other? Symbolization, right? We identify people with symbols, discrimination, dehumanization happens, organization, polarization of groups, preparation for the genocide, you could keep going, persecution, extermination, and then finally denial, right? At the end of every genocide is denial. It didn't happen, right? I would argue that denial actually begins, we see traces of denial when genocides are happening. The Nazis actually, the war was coming to an end, and they dug up mass graves and burned bodies to eliminate that evidence, right? That is an example of denial. We're going to make sure this disappears. We don't have evidence. I am arguing in my research that perhaps reconciliation, right, is the end stage of Holocaust. In this one case study, in looking at these reconciliation villages and what is happening, right, across Rwanda. It is truly remarkable. I'm sorry to, yeah.
Do you think since Rwanda was a black country, was the reason that no Western country, particularly Belgium or the United States, to intervene to stop it, since they were all black?
I don't think it was for racial, are you suggesting that there were racial reasons that we did not intervene?
Because they were black. They weren't white.
No, I would
If
say.
they had been white, would it made any difference?
Well, I would argue that we have not intervened in white genocide either. I mean, the United States knew the Holocaust was happening from the very beginning.
In fact, we actively turned people away.
Correct. So I don't think it was for racial.
It's all about economics.
Absolutely, it's what is going to benefit us, right?
A couple of questions. you said there were 8 villages, Judy?
There's currently 8.
Currently 8, and what's the average population roughly?
So I thought I put it up there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, gosh.
No.
So it depends. In Rwanda, there were about 400 families
Okay,
that are living and working side by side, both former genocidaires and former victims. You have to have that, you have to undergo this process of dialogue to live in this village.
and how old was Filbert when?
Filbert was a pretty young guy. He was maybe about 27. Yeah.
Do you see any, is there any potential utility for something like this in what we're seeing in the Israel-Gaza situation?
I think about this all the time, even in our own society and how divided we are, and you know what we're hearing, and how do we unite, how do we kind of overcome these divisions. And I am reminded of this, and if these people can do it, I'm inspired to think that other such groups can overcome these really deep divisions. The situation with Israel and Gaza, we were talking earlier, Kevin, it's a long, complicated history, right? And we can't kind of tie it up in a very simple statement. We have to understand the backstory, just as we do here in Rwanda and in every other example of genocide. Genocide is not taking place in Israel and in Gaza.
In spite of the accusations.
Correct. So in order for something to be deemed a genocide, there is a list of things that have to be present, right? The International Criminal Court identifies genocide, and I don't have this as a slide, but there are certain elements that need to be present for for a crime to be deemed genocide. That is not the case in the Middle East today. You know, people tend to use the G word, right, for effect, to say, look, they're killing all these people. But there's a lot of complicated nuances to this. For example, intent, right? What is the intent of the person who's doing the killing? So it's a little bit more complicated. You know, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think
Yep.
what we're
Thank
talking
you.
about.
Yeah, and I wasn't inferring that was a genocide, but more looking at the reconciliation process as something to move forward on in that ongoing dispute.
Unbelievable. Right now, every context is different.
Yep.
You know, the church, I will tell you, the church intervened here. So there was an element, a religious element in reconciliation in the plan that was put into place. As I said, Rwanda's a Christian country, and so they adapted some of these religious ideals when, you know, undergoing this process. So, but again, very broadly, I am inspired by this. I continue to be inspired by this. I feel like there's hope for humanity. That's the way I look at it. It's just how it comes down, because when you go into the details of a genocide and you look at the barbarity and the brutality, and always we come down to the question, how could another human being do this to another? How is it possible? Right? We see patterns over and over and over again, but this is a way out, right? This is a way out. If the government of Rwanda didn't approach this in this way, you know, the country wouldn't exist. It was an existential problem. How do we deal with the aftermath of genocide when our neighbors were against neighbors, right? What other questions about Rwanda?
Are they teaching this in the schools?
Am I teaching it?
Are they teaching it to their young students? Are they teaching?
The Rwandans?
Yes.
Yes, yes. It is very much so. I showed you the picture. There is a memorial there. That memorial in Kigali is overseen by an organization called Aegis Trust, which is based in London. They help them do all of their educational program. It is an international center for understanding the Rwandan genocide. And yes, they are underway. It's a process, right? This is still happening today, but schools, education, it is out there, right? You cannot go anywhere in Rwanda. They have memorialized sites. That church I showed you, where all of those people died, is a memorial site now, right? You go there and you understand what took place.
Is this in the curriculum in the schools in the United States?
To the extent that genocide is taught. So I would argue that certainly at a college level, in the courses that I taught at UNC Charlotte, absolutely, we covered Rwanda in a comparative genocide course. I have worked with high school teachers. Actually, I was in Shelby about 2 weeks ago. There was a high school teacher at Crest High School who was doing a separate course on Holocaust and genocide studies as an elective, right? So she is very much teaching this, but students are, choosing to participate in that. Yeah.
Is there still racial identification in Rwanda between Tutsis and
Yes.
Hutus?
I would be lying if I said no. So just because Paul Kagame says, all right, no more labels, we're all one people, that's a generational change. That's gonna be a hard thing to change, right? So yes, there is. But there is an incredible pushback on the part of the government and the international community to help.
And things are changing in Rwanda. I think we shared before when you were here that I saw a story on 60 Minutes about how these young girls from Afghanistan who were being thrown out of them, they had to leave Afghanistan when the Taliban came back in. Where did these kids relocate to?
Rwanda.
So things are definitely changing.
They are. I mean, their economy is growing. It's a small country. There are not a whole lot of natural resources, but they are using this to their advantage. And I don't
Good
mean
for
that
them.
in a negative way,
for
but
them.
they are they're learning from this particular history lesson. Before we end, I just want to share with you, any other questions on Rwanda? Yeah.
The present conflicts in the Congo and other places surrounding Rwanda, how is that affecting that area now? Because hate has a tendency to be a virus.
It is. And really, the situation right now in Congo is a result of what happened.
Yeah.
Right? But you have different leadership. And, to the extent that, there are people still sitting in refugee camps that border Rwanda, that's not acceptable, right? That is, I've been in these camps and, it's mind-blowing to know that, children have been born and raised in these refugee camps. They don't know what the outside world is. This is all they know, right? What it means to live in a refugee camp on the border of Rwanda. So it is still very much a scar. Certainly in the case of Congo, right, there are challenges. There are governmental challenges. I think, as I said, the history lesson here was a powerful one for Rwanda. And it's ongoing. It's an ongoing situation. But any other questions about? Yes. Okay, so I just want to share with you the Greenspon Center is actually bringing a discussion of genocide here to Charlotte. And it is an international photo exhibit called Seeing Auschwitz. It opens January 26th at the VAPA Center uptown, and it's running until April 15th. And what it is a series of over 100 photos of the Auschwitz extermination camp in Poland that was used during the Holocaust. These photos emerged after the war. They are both perpetrator photos and survivor photos of the camp. And it tells a story of the Auschwitz camp. It was curated by the Auschwitz State Museum in Poland, by a museum in Madrid called Musealia, and UNESCO, the United Nations, got together and said, these photos need to be shared. So the curator of this exhibit, his name is Paul Salmons, he's in London. I've worked with him at the Holocaust Museum in DC on projects. And I went to go see the exhibit when it opened in London 1.5 years ago. And I was blown away. It was remarkable. And immediately I said, this has to come to Charlotte. And so here we are, next month, it is opening here in Charlotte. This is the North American debut of this exhibit. So it is really remarkable. What's that?
Greenspon Center.
The Greenspon Center. Yeah, we have a separate designated website for, it's seeingauschwitz.com/Charlotte. It is currently running in South Africa, in Durban. But as I said, this is the first time here in North America, and it's in Charlotte. So I'm happy to share information. I bring this up because not only to invite you to this remarkable exhibit, I can tell you that it is not a graphic exhibit. You know, very often people are concerned, I don't want to see dead bodies, I don't want to see the brutality. Well, the way this has been curated, it's about individuals, right? It's the story of how does somebody take part in this? How does somebody get to this point? It takes about an hour and a half to walk through the whole exhibit, and you have an audio component that you listen. So it's self-guided.
So Judy, does that mean there are no group tours?
So once the website, actually our tickets are going to go on sale December 21st. And if you are interested in coming as a group, there's a discount as a group. You could book it, it's a time difference, so we need a date and time. But I also want to put something out there. We are also in need of people working the exhibit. So if you are interested in working, you don't have to know anything about the Holocaust, but we do need somebody to kind of take the tickets and give out the headphones to the groups that are coming. And we can offer a small stipend for that. So if you know anybody who's interested in working, please let me or Kevin know, and we're happy to get you, you know, set up. We have already been inundated by school groups. Even in the region, there's a bus already slated coming from Greensboro. They want to come and see it. You know, it's a big deal for our center, for our community, but for the region to bring this to Charlotte.
Well, and
So-
February is our peace and conflict resolution
Perfect.
building month. That's the month. So
Perfect.
you know, we can really promote this in
Yeah,
our
perfect.
district newsletter.
And if you want to come as a group,
I would love
you know, the exhibit is in 8 different rooms, and there's a dedicated space if you want to have a discussion after on site, or I'm happy to facilitate any questions or really kind of have a full, robust program. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so,
I have a question.
yes, sir.
We are all Americans here, and we sometimes don't get to hear all the true history or see it. Is there someone, professors or organization that's putting something together like this for the native Indians of this country that went through the genocide? Millions of them massacred on American soil. I was wondering if there's something like this, what the study done in Rwanda, if someone put something together regarding the native Indians of America.
It's an excellent question. I can tell you that when I started in this field 30 years ago, nobody talked about Native Americans in a genocidal tense, right? That was not, right? When we're talking about scholarly endeavors, it was not discussed. Today, it very much is, right? If we're looking at that rigid definition of what a genocide is, guess what? We had it take place right here. So the evolution of the Native American genocide was a little bit slower, but yes, there are people, there are scholars who are just getting into this. In terms of an exhibit like this, not that I'm aware of, but we're moving in that direction.
And there are speakers out there. We'll find them.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Absolutely, absolutely. It's, you know, it's an interesting way that things evolved. I think I might have shared, 20 years ago, I was in Berlin meeting with German teachers, talking about Holocaust curriculum and so forth. And I will never forget, this gentleman says to me, so, you know, you're so entrenched in Holocaust, what about your own genocide? And I really thought about it, and the truth was, at that time, we hadn't dealt with this in our history. We just I had no response for him because he was right.
Have we ever dealt with?
We have started to now. We have
Yeah, I'm
started.
talking about the
Yeah,
genocide.
and that's just what we were talking about. Scholars are finally looking at what took place as a genocide. But, 15 years ago, it wasn't a thing, but it was clear to the rest of the world, hey, wait a minute, what about what's happening in your country? Right? What about that?
And in fact,
There's a lot of parallels. We just had a really good professional development for educators where we looked at the Nazi Nuremberg laws and how they were inspired by the Jim Crow laws in our own country.
yes, Hitler used the
Correct.
and he used the eradication of the Native American
Correct.
race as justification.
Right.
They used the eugenics studies that were done.
They were impressed by what we were doing in this
We
country.
showed them how.
Correct. So this is new history for a while. This is not something that we see in our history textbooks. So, yes.
What difference does it make whether you technically classify a million people dead as genocide? It doesn't make any difference to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's crazy.
It was said, I'm attributing the quote, I don't want to attribute to the wrong person, but when we talk about like Holocaust education, 6 million Jews died. It's not that 6 million died, but one Jew died 6 million times, right? A human life is a human life. And I agree with you. So when we're talking about why, he said, why do we bother classifying something as genocide? Well, it has to do with retribution and what justice looks like, right? In the context of war, people die. It's tragic, right? But when we're talking about the international court, a genocidaire, somebody who's guilty of genocide, is treated quite differently.
And it's also, I think, a matter of impact. When you're looking at, war is one thing, but when you're looking at a concerted effort by a government that has a government role in eradicating an entire group of people, that has much more impact than just the outcomes of a casual war.
Right. And it speaks to, it's complicated. Like
It
we're
is.
talking about definitionally. What is intent?
Yeah.
Is my intent to eliminate this whole group? Or is my intent, to defend my border or defend my land? Like, that's a really hard thing to prove.
Stalin said if you kill 1,000, it's a tragedy. If you kill 1 million, it's just.
Right. Exactly.
It's what?
It's a statistic.
If you kill 1,000, it's a tragedy. If you kill 1 million, it's a statistic.
So thank you. I know we're
Thank you,
running
Judy.
late.
Yes.
I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you are interested in working our exhibit, we'd love to have you.
We'll let you definitely.
Well, as a token of our esteemed appreciation
Thank you,
of
thank
this
you.
wonderful
Thank
presentation,
you.
we want to give you this now.
Yay,
This
thank
is a
you.
beautiful, beautiful